Hi, everybody. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. We're just going to wait for people to enter the webinar.
What? Okay, I'm using the phone because we updating the driver. Okay.
Okay, we're going to get started. Larry, you're on mute, just FYI.
All right.
Oh, there you are. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Katie Harris. I am from the MLK Coalition Workshop Committee, and you are here to attend a workshop called Learning from the Past, Organizing for the Future. Before we begin, a few housekeeping details. First, we're asking the presenters to describe themselves physically for people who are visually impaired. I'm an older white woman with short curly gray hair and black glasses, and I am sitting in my home office in West Seattle. The workshops will be captioned. You can access captioning at the bottom of your screen. Look for something which says live transcript CC and click on that. I also wanted to mention that the chat works pretty much in one direction. You will be able to make comments that the presenters will see, but other attendees will not see anything that you put in the chat. We also have the Q&A function where you can put your questions for presenters, and you can choose to do that either anonymously or with your name. After the workshop, we're going to ask you please to evaluate the workshop. This is very important for our future planning, so we will provide a link for that. So now we're going to turn it over to our presenters to introduce the workshop and themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Rebecca Rosato. I work for Front and Center and the membership lead at Front and Center. I'm actually going to have everybody introduce themselves. And then we have a wonderful moderator going to join, Triana Holiday, and she will kick off the conversation. So I'm going to start with Ashley Johnson of Link Houston. Ashley, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Rebecca, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Ashley Johnson. I am the Community Affairs Director with an organization called Link Houston based out of Houston, Texas. A quick thanks to the Seattle MLK Coalition for today's panel, and especially to Front and Center's Rebecca Rosato and Paulo Nunez Ueno for the invitation. For those here on the panel, Link Houston is a transportation equity organization. We advocate for robust and equitable transportation so that all people can reach opportunity. For the visual, I'm a middle-aged African-American or Black male. I have a beard and now some frosting hair on the top of my head. I am wearing a black sweater and have a Zoom background that looks very office-like in the back. I'll kick it over to Adrian.
So great to hear from you, Ashley, and to be with you all today. My name is Adrian Hampton. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a mixed race, Black, cisgender woman. I got my afro in a bun today, and I'm wearing my big earrings. So, just out here. I'm the climate justice policy manager with the Duwamish River Community Coalition, where we advocate for a full Duwamish River cleanup, as well as amplifying community priorities from anti-displacement to climate resilience. So we work at the nexus of collaborative governments to promote health equity for everyone, no matter your zip code. So it's great to be with everyone today. I'll pass it over to Larry.
Yes, thank you. My name is Larry Gossett. I'm an elder Black man. I'm happy to be on this panel because as a community organizer, I have never known any efforts to be successful if we did not first learn and understand the past before we started thinking about what needed to be done to create a better future for ourselves or our people. And I'm very happy to join the others. In 2019, I concluded a 25-year experience as an elected official on the Martin Luther King Jr., I'm always happy to say that, County Council. Thank you. And I don't know who I'm passing it over to because I can't see people.
Wow.
Is Treyana still on?
Yeah, I'm here now. Thanks so much, Larry. Sorry, you guys, the
All
show
right.
ran over a little bit, but happy to be with all of you guys. Treyana Holiday, and I will be moderating this panel. And I'm really looking forward to diving into the discussion because we are really here talking about the collective organizing that it takes to get things done. And it was so well showcased in the film Ramps to Nowhere. I really hope that the audience members have had a chance to see that film. I'm really happy to be here alongside Ashley, Adrian, and Mr. Gossett, and really dive into the ways that their work can kind of really talk about this theme of collective organizing. And it's something that I have experienced personally as a community organizer, an ambassador with Africatown, a media director with King County Equity Now, even as my role in Converge Media as a co-host and show producer here. It is important that we really dive into the mechanisms of what it looks like to have collective organizing, because we understand that that is what pushed progress forward for so many generations. It is voices coming together. So I'm really excited to be able to moderate the panel and to start diving into you guys' expertise and how you guys have seen that in your personal work, but also, again, connecting to this larger theme in the film of Ramps to Nowhere. And so thank you all for joining us on this panel. And thank you so much for everyone behind the scenes who helped to get us to this point. We'll go ahead and dive right in because I'm sure everybody has given their introductions. And so there's no need for me to read bios. It's great to hear directly from you all. And again, thank you for allowing me to moderate. One of my first questions that I really want to throw out to all of you is when we talk about the collective voice, we understand that oftentimes that's built on relationships. And I really want to hear from you all how you guys intentionally build relationships in order to organize that collective power. I'll go ahead and start with you, Adrian.
I'm like, how much time do I got? Okay, so first and foremost, relationships. I think that the folks that I work with at DRCC have been doing this work for so long, and there's no listserv, there's no what have you. These are speaking with neighbors, talking at bus stops, getting connected and carving out spaces for community to actually get together. And this has been so difficult also in this pandemic, like when we are experiencing increased feelings of isolation, we're out there knocking on doors and trying to host virtual spaces for those who can attend those too. And so really trying to just meet folks where they're at, because it's the community's experience first and foremost. And now more than ever, we want to make sure we're hearing from folks to amplify those concerns, to the ones who really need to hear it, right? The ones who really need to make the big changes. So I'll pause there.
I was muted. I was just saying that's great. And thank you so much for that start, Adrienne. And I agree. This is not something that can be done with a listserv. So, that's why I think it's really interesting. It's also the basis of really organizing. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to you, Ashley. How have you guys been able to be intentional about your relationship building in your work?
Sure. Thanks so much, Triana. And good meeting you here. The conversation about organizing really is it has a number of different folds. It's unique for us organizationally because Link Houston doesn't really define itself as a community organizing organization so much as we're one that tries to combine data and analysis on issues associated with mobility, accessibility, climate justice, and things like that with the power of community voice. And it's really essential in organizing that the people that you're working with in community and really understanding them. Adrienne brought up a good point in meeting people where they are, but the other one is helping people to find their own voice in doing this. And very often they are engaging with decision makers and stakeholders who are not necessarily people that they're familiar with, people who are indigenous to the communities or the cultures and things where they're from. But these people are holding sometimes the purse strings or the keys to a lot of things that these communities need. Historically, they may have been marginalized for a long time, or maybe they've been, just underserved. And it could be for a number of different reasons, things that are even systemic. To that point, you're trying to help people who are finding their own power. And in order to do that, there's an education component to it, but there's also supporting and helping these people to build two-way relationship with these people who may be instrumental in decisions that are improving their quality of life or their livelihood. And so I think that is really like one of the very first steps and essential to even moving further kind of up that ladder of organizing and really kind of influencing positive change. Like Adrienne, I'll pause there.
Oh yeah, thank you so much, Ashley. And you guys are both right. I'm sure there's so much more that can be said because this is such a integral thread into the work. And so thank you for giving your expertise, Ashley, there in terms of how you guys are doing it outside of this community organizing format. So really great to hear from you. And of course, I got to pass this over to Mr. Larry Gossett, because you and your work were so integral in the film Of Ramps to Nowhere. We actually got a great example for those of you audience members who were able to see the film. You actually got to see a part of Mr. Gossett's work out there in community, really garnering support and working with other organizations outside of the main organization he was working for and working with. Mr. Gossett, tell us a little bit about the importance of that relationship building that you needed to even get this to the place where you guys were able to stop this, transportation development that was going to really come through particular communities. And it was the voice of the people that halted that. Tell us a little bit more about you building relationships to make that happen.
Thank you very much, Trey. Building relationships is and always has been, in terms of community organizing, very important. Between 1968 and 70, that was the time period in which we built a massive movement against the building of R.H. Thompson Freeway through the University District, Mount Lake, the central area, and what is called the Judkins Rejected neighborhood, another very low-income African-American community. And we had learned this from Martin Luther King Jr., since this is Martin Luther King Jr. workshop, the importance of being patient with one another, showing love and respect for the other members of the coalition. And actually, Martin Luther King used to talk about loving your enemy, which was difficult for a lot of people to do, but he was very successful at talking about, if you want to be involved in our movement, you have to show love for those who you completely disagree with also, because we're trying to build a new community where people respect and love one another regardless of class, race, or other. But because we were successful at doing that across racial and geographic lines, we built a very powerful coalition of people to stop the R.H. Thompson Freeway from being built through our community. In the Black community, even then, Trey, a lot of us had read and learned about that urban renewal oftentimes had meant Negro removal. They were going to tear down hundreds of houses in the inner city in order that white middle class people could more easily get to their suburban community. And we got all the impacted communities to work together, and we were successful at stopping it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mr. Larry Gossett. Always love understanding the behind the scenes of it all. And that really brings me to my next question for all of you panelists is, when we talk about garnering this level of relationship and community support, this means that you guys are doing it with a purpose oftentimes, right? And so I really want to be able to hear from all of you some of the ways that you guys have seen those relationships come into fruition and full action. Maybe, as Larry's and this film actually showcases as halting something, but in other cases, it may be starting something or garnering support for something that's already there so that it can get more attention. So I want to hear from you all how you guys have been able to now take those relationships that you've built in community and actually, move it into collective power. I'll start with you, Ashley.
Sure thing. The first thing, and it brings back to your last question, is just the recognition with people at an individual level or at a neighborhood level, understanding that their voices are powerful, and really that the messages that they can say, while sometimes a lot of these issues or debates or even things that are being talked about in hallowed halls of government and stuff like that are really hardcore issues that can change lives. Understanding that it's not just about lawyers, it's not just about money, but voices and bodies really, really make a difference. One of the things that we noticed locally with our work was that in forming coalitions with stakeholder organizations, whether they be advocacy organizations or nonprofits, and even individual people, those things were springboards then to birth even more community-based organizations that came out. One of them that happened locally with the highway expansion project for us was a community-based organization ended up called Stop Text I-45. And what it was a set of community people from multiple different geographics throughout the city. But these people were not only able to organize themselves to meet regularly, educate themselves, but directly engage people at elected official levels from a municipal, county, state, and even federal level. And then even more so, organize themselves then to, form a complaint, which was sent directly up to Federal Highway Administration up in Washington, D.C. about this, an instrumental component that's been involved with challenging the project that is going on here locally. It's not that there haven't been situations like this, like you see in the Ramps to Nowhere documentary or what's going on a contemporary basis here, but the fact that the Department of Transportation locally here in Texas has been challenged in this way was really significant, because it's not only showing people isolated within this one individual example, but it's something that really can set a precedent for how organizations like this, similar to what you saw in the 1960s in Seattle, and how people engage. And so that precedent being set really tells people that, they can have a seat at the table from the very beginning, which is something that we often don't see. We see these conversations go on in boardrooms and in back rooms and things like that, and then they come out to community and say, this is what we've come up with for your neighborhood, for the people that are in your area. I consider this for lack of a better term, walking in somebody's house and not wiping your feet on the mat when you do that. And it very often is people who the project or the initiative that they're looking to do, it doesn't hit them at their doorstep. And I think in a lot of instances, the respect and acknowledgement of people's livelihoods in that way is very much overlooked. And this is why, the creation and the development of these organizations, sometimes, or these coalitions that happen within these spaces, is so essential. It really gives people power that they need.
Oh, agree 100%, Ashley. Thank you so much for that great example. And it's beautiful to understand and I think for us to be able to spotlight and highlight the fact that everybody's voices matter in these kinds of situations, and the ideas around this collective voice, and then challenging something like you're talking about with the Texas transportation, that is major. And so love hearing that impact there. Thank you so much for sharing. Mr. Gossett, I mean, we saw here in the film Ramps to Nowhere that this collective voice, this collective power was able to halt something that would have been detrimental to many communities. But this is also something that's really, it seems like, has been at the ethos of a lot of your organizing work, and you taking that experience into King County Council as a council member. But I want to hear a little bit about how outside of Ramps to Nowhere, you've been able to wield collective energy and power. You've done a lot of this. I mean, I know it took a lot of community effort just to change Empire Way to MLK Way. You were integral in that. Let's hear a little bit more about how you've been able to build relationships and actually garner collective power.
Thank you, Trey. I'd like to use an example from 1981. I have also been a member of what those of you who are from the greater Seattle area know as the Gang of Four, where over 40 years we were able to build strong relationships between Black community, Asian community, Latino community, and Native American community activists. And we were able to speak truth for power in a very meaningful way as an example. As a result, in 1981, Ronald Reagan became president of the United States of America. And in that capacity, the first thing he did in January of 81 is to close down, through his executive power, the nation's primary anti-poverty agency. It had been called Office of Economic Opportunity, or OEO, but at that time, it was called the Community Services Administration. Luckily for us, I was the executive director of CAMP, the Central Area Motivation Program. The Central Area is Seattle's primary Black community, historically speaking, not now because it's been significantly gentrified. But when Martin Luther King Jr. himself came here in 1961, it was to stimulate an open housing movement. 88% of all Black people at the time that he visited our community lived in the Central area. In 81, though, Reagan cut our budget from $467,000 down to $46,000 after having sent the federal government, before he got elected, or maybe right after November of '67, had sent us a letter saying we were going to get our $467,000, not 46. It wasn't until January till we got a letter saying we were only going to get 46,000. And we said, no, we're not going to go for that. So we mobilized about 150 people who were our clients at camp, the Black community, 100 folks from El Centro de la Raza, the Latino-based community group, and about 20 Indians and 20 Asians. Kind of all of us went together downtown to get camp money, and as a result, we were able to go in there, and they heard people talking Chinese, Spanish, Ebonics, and it just blew the mind of the staff, and they were so fearful. Suffice it to say, we left that meeting with a check that day for $465,000. Our the budget we were supposed to originally get. And I think that's a good example. We wouldn't have just going down there, Black community only, or just some of the community leaders, we wouldn't have had any impact on it. By taking the masses of people, it made a huge difference. That's why I always advocate the power of community unity and going against those folks in power. Thank you.
Beautiful example. Love the legacy of that, and really the collective energy of multiple communities coming together when there's a common cause of just protecting each other. It's a beautiful, beautiful time in Seattle's history. So thank you so much for sharing that. Really love that story. Adrian, same to you. I mean, clearly there's a way that you're wielding power. How are you using it? Give us a great example of using that collective power.
Sure. I mean, this conversation is like just warming my heart. It's just so amazing, and I'm just so inspired by y'all. I think it really, we believe in people, right? Their power, self-determination, our creativity, our leadership, right? Just believing in people. And like Martin Luther King Jr. said, with this faith, we'll be able to speed up the day when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Like, I always remember that, right? So this starts with knowledge sharing, translating materials, right? Like Larry was talking about, so many different languages exist within our community. So it's so important folks remain informed about what is happening in community and like their particular interests, right? Every year we ask, what should be the focus of our energy? Where should we be putting our attention? Community sets the agenda. And, even today, we're still pushing for change on things that were said a decade ago, even longer, like the Dramash River cleanup, like having a river free of PCBs for community and fishers. And so, I think this is all to say that we as human beings are not just impacted by one thing. There is so much out there. And it's about community, elevating engagement, leadership, and making sure we're bringing the youth along with us too, through youth programming. And, I think a lot of this is long-term and short-term planning, but it's like, how are we also reacting on the fly, for example? So when the West Yellow Bridge closed, and all that traffic was coming through our neighborhoods and trucks were backing up into Georgetown, impacted by truck idling, community was making their own, slow down signs, right, for people driving around the neighborhood. With the wildfire events, how are we getting out on the ground with air filters, just to pass out to folks so they could have healthy air circulation in their homes? This also looks like hosting neighborhood cleanups, right, just so get folks together outside, get moving around and doing something that they can feel good about. And even creating our own like community currency, what we call Duwamish dollars, to support local businesses and do our part in trying to increase food security in the neighborhood. And for pollution, our youth were out there collecting moss off of trees to identify hotspot areas for pollution. So there is just a little bit of everything, I think, going on. And most importantly, making sure this information is seen and heard and being acted on upon those who are who we hold accountable and who have a role to play in community, right? As we heard from the movie, all the power to the people, and it's the entities working in our communities that need to be guided and listening to community priorities, making sure they're best serving those who are around where they work, but that's someone's home. So that is how we get moving in community. And yeah, thanks so much for asking.
Oh my gosh, I'm so inspired by these examples. Thank you guys so much. And quickly too, I've seen this happen as we've really been able to either halt actions, get public land donated to community, get funding for development projects, and halt predatory development happening in the already heavily gentrified Central District of Seattle, as Mr. Gossett spoke to earlier. And for me, I think I get really inspired by the age we are living in, because it means in a technological era and digital age, we have the opportunity to actually include people who normally wouldn't be included. did, right? We can set up a couple of different campaigns. They click a couple of buttons, and now they've emailed all of city council, or they've emailed all of King County Council, or whoever the body is. They've sent an email to that executive director and their board, right, by a couple of different buttons. So even the digitization of how we build relationships and collective power, I've seen that firsthand in my work with King County Equity Now and Africa Town, and it's been a beautiful thing to actually witness how people say, you know what, no, I'm going to do something. And even if that means I'm at work and I click a couple buttons, I'm going to make sure that my voice is a part of this collective, nature. So just loved hearing you guys' examples. One of the things that I really want to get to here is, there's a wide variety of ways that we could talk about kind of organizing and wielding collective power. We've talked about relationships. We've also talked about how those relationships have wielded some successes for each one of you all, and now me just including my own. But, when we think about certain strategies, because it can be very different depending on what it is you're trying to go for. And so I want to talk a little bit about, how you strategize for a very particular outcome when we're talking about collective organizing. And I know that can have a wide ranging effect, but I think each one of you has a great example or some insight that you can share with our community here that's on this workshop, and get them to understand that there are specific strategies to building this up. And before I actually launch it over to the panelists, I want to make sure that you guys out there in the audience know that we will also be taking questions from you all. We're trying to make sure we get at least a couple in before we end the workshop. So please feel free to submit your questions. You can use the Q&A or you can use the chat. We have folks behind the scenes that'll make sure that I get the questions so we can get them answered for you as well. But let's go ahead and start with you, Mr. Gossett, in terms of, particular strategy that you've had to utilize to get a very specific outcome when it comes to organizing.
All right. And since this is the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee sponsored activity, I would like to call upon a major initiative started by the MLK Committee in 1999. That year, Eddie Wright Jr., one of the longtime activists in the African American community here in Seattle, in front of 3,000 people at Garfield High School Gymnasium, where we were rallying for our annual tribute to Dr. King, said that this the birthday of Martin Luther King was made a holiday in 1986. He said, here it is, 1999, and we live in King County. Why don't we start a movement to rename this county in honor of Dr. King? And since a king's crown is the symbol of our government, and that makes no sense in a multiracial community where you're trying to build democracy, having a king's crown as your image. Let's do away with that image and make Martin Luther King's image, his face, the image of our government. No way in the world. I mean, that's the best way in the world that we could start promoting more democratic unity and change in this county. And the audience went, wow. Then over the next 6 years, because it was very difficult to get this change made, we strategized on how best to. We have 29 cities, and we had not done much work outside of Seattle, a lot of us. So we strategized and going to, since past Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist preacher, we knew that we could get moderate and liberal white churches to go along. So we identified churches, we identified neighborhood groups, and we identified various workers' organizations, unions. Remember, he died fighting for the right of garbage workers in Memphis, Tennessee to organize and get better pay. And that strategy proved very important to us in getting maximum unity that included people from neighborhoods all over the county. And then we went down to the state government because the only entity that can change a county's name here in Washington State is the state government. So we had to get the Senate, and then the House of Representatives and the state government to vote to change the county name. Then we had to get the governor to sign off on it. The governor at that time was Christine Gregoire, and this was around 2005 when we finally got it done. But if we didn't have this strategy that we had developed in '99 and had the impetus of having hundreds of people sign up to collect names on petitions at that meeting, I don't think we would have been successful to cover the whole county. And as a result of covering the county, being strategic in our organizing, we were able to now make this county the only geographic jurisdiction in the world community, not just in the United States. It's the only geographic jurisdiction in the world named in honor of Dr. King. And that took people's power to get that done. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Beautiful example of a very specific strategy for a specific outcome. And also another example of, hey, you know, some of these things that we go for when we're talking about building collective power, it takes years to get it done. So there's a lot of dedication and intentionality behind the way that you build the power, wield the power, actualize it, and continue to keep folks engaged. So thank you so much for sharing that, Mr. Gossett. Great example all around. Adrian, I'll come to you next in terms of, you know, hey, we had to do something very specific, you know, when we talk about our collective energy and voice in order to get something very specific done.
Absolutely. So, like, first of all, I'm just going to throw it out there, confidence, right? Being so sure in our power that we can make a change. And, you know, along the way, making sure that we're looking out for each other, right? Making sure everyone feels appreciated and honored, and that we're caring for each other along the way. An example I'll give is the Dramash Valley Community Benefits Agreement with the Port of Seattle. So this is a resolution that community created in which the Port of Seattle adopted. And there's a lot of language in the resolution, but it's all to increase health equity, as the Dramash Valley is a near port community, right? It says, hey, Port, this is what you are going to do to decrease your impacts in the valley, whether that is from related to the river cleanup or from cargo and handling equipment, right? Making sure your activities are no longer harming, but restoring and healing. And so these kind of things, I'll just call it like policy or regulations. While we see these amazing investments coming towards community, we can't lose sight of the real regulatory and policy changes that we need to not protect industry, but protect ourselves, protect the people that we love. And I'll end on this, right? One thing that we try to hone in on are what we call the root causes, right? And something that the river has taught us, our resilient Duwamish River, is that if there is a problem downstream, you can look upstream and really kind of figure out what is going on. So we are constantly trying to get to the highest level that we can. And that is one big strategy that we take. And hopefully then push for policy and regulation that we can point to and use and leverage as we move on for the transformation that, you know, community is calling for.
Yes, snaps all
Yes.
around. All this work is so necessary, and I just love being inspired listening to these stories, because they're, again, like one of those things that let you know what, we're on the right track when we talk about the work that we're all doing. So just amazing. Thank you so much, Adrian. Ashley, coming right to you. You know, we talk about, hey, you don't work for a typical organizing entity. However, it's at the base of a lot of what you guys are doing, and you still probably have to take a very specific strategy to get something very specific done in your work. Share with us.
I'm going to borrow one of Adrian's statements before. How much time do you need? You can come at this from a number of different angles, and Larry brought some of these up before. I am so I guess enamored just by the history and the legacy he has, and just working there locally in the community. A couple of ideas come to mind. One in particular that we used is educating some of the communities that were involved in our local highway expansion fight about the power dynamic and, the people with whom they needed to engage, whether they were local stakeholders in the area or the people who were actually making decisions, and knowing which channels to look and to try and filter and to find allies. This is actually a key strategy that's used in community organizing. Is you need to have not only connections with people, but you need to also be able to develop a story that's going to be compelling. At the end of the game, if you can't will people to act, then the organizing really can't form or take shape. One of the particular examples that we had was there was a key decision going on with the local metropolitan planning organization here about a large sum of the funds. The project that's going on locally here, is to the tune of between, above $8 billion. And so one of the particular things was funding that was going to come from the local MPO, then to go be given to a segment of the project. While they ended up approving the monies that they wanted to send to Texas Department of Transportation for it, what we also managed to do in that conversation there was get an award of an additional $51.5 million that was going to be used then for development of infrastructure and things like that within communities that were going to be impacted by the project that hadn't been promised before. And it was actually proposed by people on the Transportation Policy Council that was there. That money wasn't promised initially during the idea and the planning of the project, but a meeting that usually would have lasted only about an hour and a half or 2 hours ended up lasting about 4 or 5 hours, because there was nearly 50 or 60 people who came up and made comments regarding the project and how adversely impacting to the community it was going to be. In order to make that happen, that's a matter of not only organizing people through emails, but it's also helping and supporting people so they can organize and have a clear and unified statement. And doing actions like that, whether it's talking about some of the things that Adrian has been talking about here today and other ones, that is the power that you build and develop. And when you do that, you can really make a massive, contribution or make a massive statement in order to make a dent in the conversation that you're having whole scale. The situation that's going on here locally within Houston is not done, and so the fact that it has been extended to the time frame and the time period that it has is clearly indicative of the response that has come from thousands of people locally, and them putting pressure, appropriate and calculated pressure on the powers that be, and getting them involved in these conversations. And this is what people can do in any situation. This organizing strategy, these strategies that we're talking about, can be used in any particular matter or an issue that's going on. But what it really does at the end of the day is it helps people, once again, to find and establish and exert their own energy in order to make sure that they are not only raising their voice, but it's also helping to protect their qualities of life.
Bravo. Absolutely agreed wholeheartedly with all of these strategies, and really appreciate you guys being able to dive deep, because sometimes I think it's people can see it at a surface level, but to understand all the work that it takes behind the scenes is really important. And actually, you bring up something that was going to really take me into my next question, and maybe you already answered it a little bit, but I really want to make sure the audience understands the importance of why community members need to be engaged. I mean, I talk about it from not just a civic engagement process, but understanding what's going on in their communities and how their collective voice will change, the change they want to see in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in their cities, county, state, whatever, depending on what level we're talking about. It's up to the people to participate, right, in order to make these things happen. And so I would love for all of you guys to kind of speak out about why it's important for community members to be engaged, to be involved, and maybe to encourage the folks that are on our workshop today to find ways that they can get engaged and involved. And Adrian, I'll go ahead and start with you.
I had something planned to say, but then just like hearing that question again, the first thing that came to mind was just culture, right? And how I think so much of our problems were created by one culture that had total disregard of all various backgrounds that are within our communities. And so by lifting up community voice, that means we're bringing cultures to the table and different ways of doing and going about situations and things. And I think that is so, so important. There is not just one right way to do something. There are so many various and beautiful, vibrant ways of going about creating solutions to problems, right? And so I think that when we kind of get out of that one track mind, and bring more culture to the table, then we can really get a mixed array and a variety of ways to go about problems, and also to reach people, to make sure no one's left out of the conversation. Representation is so important, and that is just one thing that will never go away. It will always remain important. So I just think culture first and foremost.
Agreed, 100%. So great that you actually honed in on that. Thank you so much, Adrian, because it is real. That part of it really strikes home for me. Ashley, let the folks know why it's important for community members to be engaged in this work.
Engagement is essential, I think, now, now more than ever, because we're just seeing, I think, in a number of different spaces, that we're in a society now, on a number of different levels, that is just experiencing a certain level of polarization. It's trying to find its way back to the middle, but there are a lot of people who still seem to be they seem to be satisfied with the status quo, and making a conscious effort to voice and say that those things don't need to stay the same, is essential. The other thing is, we're also in a period now where I think that there's a certain sector or contingent of society that is really having to come to grips with some inconvenient truths that are being brought to their attention. And it's more important now than ever that that we don't let people off the hook about those, and let them know that these aren't things that we're saying. These aren't things that we're saying solely to make you feel uncomfortable, but we're letting you know that injustices have happened in the past, and those things need to change. And it's going to take the power, I think, of community voice. It's going to take the power of policy and action, and it's going to take I think the power of leveraging the new tools that we have been allowed to, and applying. It can be an email, it can be speaking at a public forum or something like that that's going on in your local government, or it can simply be, as we saw, I think, over the past couple of years, a camera. A camera can actually change the decision that is going to be made, which is going to affect somebody's life. And so I think that using all of these and using them in effective tools and ways are just a few of the examples of what having an organized statement coming from community can do. And it can really, really change the lives of people, and meet people at their doorsteps. And like a young little girl said, for her father, it can change the world.
Yes, Ashe, could totally change the world. And we've seen it do so, right? And so that's where I get really excited about some of the historical examples, because it really informs the current actions that we're taking as a collective, in all of the realms. And so thank you so much, Ashley, for sharing that. Mr. Gossett, I mean,
Yeah.
it's important for people to be engaged. Tell us why it's been important throughout your career and your legacy, when we talk about people really being engaged and community members standing up together to fight for the things that they want to see.
Okay, I'll deal with that. I wanted to ask you, are we going to have time for questions and comments from the audience? Because I always learn a lot from that too.
Yeah, we are leaving it open. Again, I will prompt it. We have
Oh,
no questions as of yet, but we definitely wanted to, if folks do have questions, we do want to be able to save some space for that. So that opportunity is still open and available if anybody would like to submit any questions for the panel to answer themselves.
okay. And as to your question, the only thing that I want to say is there is no way that, and I think this is true not only in America, the United States of America, but throughout the world, that for oppressed and disadvantaged communities internationally, and I think that Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, the great American anthropologist, reinforced this point in a lot of her work, where she went all over the world studying how change and organizing is done in various communities around the world. And it always takes, I'd like to say to our audience this afternoon, a committed, small, it doesn't have to, it's usually a small group of committed people who have a vision and are selfless and not opportunistic, and are willing to do the planning to make their vision of change that improves the conditions of people, make the people aware of that, and then they start organizing around it. So it takes a small organized group of activists always to define the problem, give vision and light to it, and then start organizing. That's why I really like the name of this workshop, Learning from the Past so that you can more effectively organize for the future, is so important. And I hope that we can hear a few more voices on this topic as we move down the line. Thank you.
There we are. Yes, that's, I agree when it comes to the title of this workshop, that it's exactly what we need. And that's why I think we really stand on the progressive nature of the past. And if nobody ever did anything with regard to their own rights or making their voices heard or collectivizing their voices and their power, we would see a lot of those same age-old systems. We talk about antiquated approaches and strategies. We would see all of that still to this day, but there's so much in terms of new laws and policy and the ways that we built institutions and having a more centered focus on specific cultures, as Adrian pointed out earlier, that there's a need for that. There was a need for everybody to voice their collective concern for themselves as a whole and as a community. We have about 7 minutes left, and I want you guys to be able to have a little bit of time to just kind of wrap up and really, for me, one thing about these kind of panels is how can we leave these audience members with something that they can be doing now, right? When we talk about organizing, learning from the past and organizing for the future, what are some of the things you guys are working on right now that maybe can be bolstered by more community support and effort? Please give us those examples if you have them. Mr. Gossett, I know you've been doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that are going on right now that can still utilize community voice and collective power?
Yeah, the theme, I'd like to draw real quickly upon the theme of this weekend's tribute to Dr. King. Our theme is truth and education now. We have to speak truth to power. We have to stop the lies that are generating so much support in this country. And we have to be more disciplined and organized and unified in order to be able to do that. And that's what I take from having the opportunity to have these kinds of discussions, being able to say that to people and have them think about how we can be more disciplined, more organized, and reach out to all the people and not be doctrinaire and narrow and pompous, thinking that we know everything. Thank you for that closing question.
Absolutely, and agree 100%. uh, uh, Adrian, tell us what you think, right now, what folks can be doing to be a part of all these solutions that folks like yourselves are creating.
Absolutely. Well, I'll just take a moment to uplift something that Ashley pointed to earlier in our conversation was status quo, right? So, for those who are listening, like in your every day to day, think about that status quo and think about um, what is a tradition that maybe doesn't have to be there anymore, or it's maybe just something within your power that you can tweak that would actually have an amazing ripple effect, right? And so, I brought up, the roots earlier. So maybe let's think about the leaves, right? What's that one thing that you can just pick that's easy to change, but it actually might have more leverage for transformation than you may think it will. So that's something I'll leave with you all. And thanks, Ashley, for the tip.
Yeah, great one. And great to throw it to Ashley. Ashley, let us know, as we end here, we have just a little bit more information to share after you share this, but what should people be doing right now?
Right now, people need to be listening. Right now, people need to be getting their thoughts ready about not only what's going on, that's front facing for them. The COVID-19 pandemic has put a lot of priority issues for people right at the front of their doorstep. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's no shame in that. People need to be dealing with that. But people also need to be recognizing that there are things that are to be going on and going ahead. Adrian and Mr. Gossett have been bringing up some good MLK quotes that have made me feel delinquent because I haven't mentioned one, but it's one that really comes to mind for me right now. Change doesn't roll on wheels of inevitability. It comes through continuous struggle, and that's what we're seeing now. And so you must straighten your backs now and work for the freedom that you want. It says, he said, Dr. King said, a man cannot ride you unless your back is bent. And that's why we need to stand ourselves up straight. And this is why, particularly now, we need to be more involved and more engaged in these conversations and things that may be, while they may not be what you call kitchen table issues, they are issues that are affecting the steps outside your door, and they're affecting your neighborhood. And this is a time right now that we cannot afford to be siloed, I think, as people and as communities. And we're going to have to abandon, organize ourselves together on a lot of issues that I think are going to affect us down the road in the long run. In some instances, the powers that be that do want the status quo, they are willing to hold and delay and wait you out and try to exhaust you. And this is a time that we cannot be exhausted. This fight is going to be long, and it's one I think we need to be prepared for. And just acknowledging that while there's nothing wrong with being weary, but there is strength in numbers so that someone can help you along. And I think if we can pull ourselves together, we will endure these storms that are going on right now. So, in closing, just saying, be educated, be informed, seek truthful information. And to what Mr. Gossett was saying before, don't be afraid to speak truth to power, because power will try to take whatever truth works in its own best interest. And sometimes that is a truth that is not convenient for any of us.
Oh, you guys are just brilliant. Thank you so much. And just like that, we have one question that came through in the chat. And I know we may not have time for everyone to answer, but I want to make sure that we get Joy Randall's question out there. And I'm probably going to pose this to you, Adrian, because I think you guys are really involved in getting youth as a part of this movement. It says the film Ramps to Nowhere was excellent and very inspirational. Ensuring these stories, along with the history, stays accessible to all to inspire. It was mentioned that students must be included and brought along. How can we encourage schools, especially those in predominantly white districts that are not learning or exposing the true rich history of social justice movements, in fact, being attacked as well. Teachers are being targeted and leaving. It's discouraging. What do you recommend, or how can we really push to reach more of the youth? I'll go to you, Adrian, here.
Sure, that's a great question. So shout out to Carmen and Ruby, who helped lead our Dramash Valley Youth Corps program, which has been around for so long. And I think it's not just like within schools, but like what happens outside of schools, making sure youth know that they have a place to go and to be heard and something to do, right? That's also going to lift up their learning and create opportunities for them to feel like they can give back, right? And so whether that is planting, doing like tree planting or helping restore a trail, and then they can put up some artwork and then get paid for it, most importantly, you know, give them something to do that they can be proud of, where they're also giving back to community at the same time. I think in this pandemic, we have to look out for our youth because no one likes to look at a computer screen, especially if you're growing up. Like that's just not fair to do. So I think you know, the more we can create programs where there's like applied learning activities and youth get to express themselves. For our youth program, I present there every quarter, and I do a activity that's called, it's around climate justice, but it's like, what is your superpower, right? And so someone will say, I don't have a superpower. And I'll be like, okay, well, what do you like to do? And they'll be like, I like to do makeup or like play video games. And I'm like, those are things that are like, you know, attention to detail or like strategy. I'm like, this is within you. So making sure our youth know that we believe in them, that we love them, and that we know they can go the distance. It's so important. So I'll leave y'all with that and open up to anyone else who wants to answer.
Well, I think that was a great wrap up. Go ahead, Larry. Do you want to say something, Mr. Gossett?
Yeah, I wanted, thank you. I wanted to quickly say something because as the movie or the film that we saw, Freeway to Nowhere, pointed out, here in Seattle, it was the Black Student Union and the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense were the two primary Black community organizations that got involved at the beginning of this effort to stop the freeway from destroying and closing down large parts of our traditional Black community. And we had Black Student Union members from Washington Junior High, Meany, Garfield, Franklin, and Cleveland, and the University of Washington, all going door to door. And we had about 50 brothers and sisters that weren't in school. They were young adults, so they were doing other things from the Black Panther Party that went door to door with us. And we mobilized. We had one meeting where about 1,000 people came. And we told each of the youth, look, y'all can get 7 people, your parents, your brothers and sisters, we don't care, yourselves. It's 15 to 20 of y'all. And then we'll just do the general mobilization and throughout the community. And then, but we're going to check y'all. We want the names of the people you're going to bring. And a lot of them didn't think they could do it, but just about all of them brought at least 7, 8 people. They explained what the issues were. And then they in turn brought other people, and we had a huge community meeting around the issue. And, you know, and there were a lot of adults and some youth that came from the predominantly white communities in Mount Lake and the university. But we did some righteous community organizing, all done by youth. So youth can get involved, and we need to spend time at encouraging them to be involved in the reforms that our community so desperately needs. Thank you, Trey.
Yes, and thank you all for chiming in there. I see you went off mute. Did you want to say a couple words too?
Only to say that, you know, to Adrian and Larry's points, the young people are the legacy building that's going to, you know, they're going to be the next organizers on things like this. One of the things, particularly in our communities, particularly our communities of color and our indigenous populations, is you need legacy building for these leaders that are going to be in these communities and things, and tapping those resources, whether it's at a middle school or whether it's through a program or something like that, is going to build the next set of legendary people who are going to be involved in other conversations that are going to go on for years and decades moving ahead. So kudos to everybody, like I said, who's bringing along a young person with them to be involved in these dialogues in these spaces.
Absolutely. And I know we're a bit over time, and here are some steps that folks can take. And I kind of want to also speak to this because the question was really asked about reaching youth in these predominantly white schools that are not actually teaching these social justice movements. And I will say that what all of the panelists just spoke to here is direct connection to youth. Sometimes when you're talking about, the status quo systems, antiquated systems, folks that are still stuck in, some of the older ideologies of how to move as a society, you have to be able to have a direct connection to people that maybe they don't actually have those ideas. The students in the classrooms of these predominantly white schools that are still stuck in the ways that they want to teach things, it can go beyond the school, and you can actually have a direct contact with those youth and really get youth to understand that they are the future and that what they do now actually is going to benefit their future if they're talking about being involved in social justice issues. So right there, if we go back to the last slide, you can research different organizations that spark your interest. Please connect with organizations, community members. As it says here, join a session like you're doing today, attend a different meeting, get out of your comfort zone. And lastly, literally take action. When we talk about the easiest ways to do so, there's plenty of digital campaigns out there, digital petitions that you can sign to really be engaged. And if you have the time, volunteer, give a couple hours a week to something. I know Katie Harris has been volunteering with the MLK Coalition for a long time, and it takes effort and energy from all of us in order to make this change. So thank you guys again for joining. All the links to the organizations that have spoken today and that have actions that you can take or ways that you can be involved and stay engaged are right there for you as well. Please click in and join the conversation, join this action. Thank you guys again for being here with us. Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you so much, Trey, for this was wonderful. I am so pleased by all the resources and the ideas that you brought to this workshop. This workshop is being recorded, so in a few days you'll be able to hear it again, see it again on the MLK Coalition website. And we also will send you resources from this workshop that the panelists have mentioned. So you'll get that in a follow-up letter within about 24 hours. We would like to ask you please to evaluate the workshop, and the link to evaluate the workshop is in the chat, along with a link to the remaining workshops that we're holding, and we hope you will join us. This concludes this presentation. Thank you so much for coming.